Christ. Clinton, did you build this for NASA or actual humans? Joe Bennett's voice cut through the boardroom like a knife through butter. He flicked my 95-page risk assessment binder with the tip of his finger like it might contaminate him. I blinked. 3 minutes into my presentation. That's all I got before the new CFO decided to humiliate me in front of the entire board. He held up my 6 weeks of work like it was radioactive waste, then let it drop onto the mahogany table with a thud that echoed off the glass walls. The silence stretched so long it felt like years. Then he pulled out his laptop, clicked to a 3-slide PowerPoint deck with gradients that looked like a candy store exploded. I stared at those slides, my throat tightening. Rainbow pie charts. Buzzword salad. Not a single stress test in sight. I'd spent 42 days modeling every possible scenario the lead investors had specifically requested. Every assumption was documented. Every risk was mapped. Every compliance requirement was footnoted and cross-referenced. And this pretty boy with his MBA from nowhere and his ego the size of Manhattan was replacing it with what looked like a high school presentation. My voice didn't crack when I spoke, but something inside me did. Joe, the investors specifically asked for detailed stress analysis with regulatory compliance mapping. What you're showing doesn't meet those requirements. He cut me off with a laugh that made my skin crawl. Relax, Clinton. We're telling a story here, not putting people to sleep. These venture capital guys don't read footnotes. They want excitement, not spreadsheets. The room chuckled. I didn't. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was suffocating. That laughter haunted me for the rest of the meeting. Joe clicked through his deck with the confidence of someone who thought revenue projections were about feelings rather than mathematics. See? Simple. Clean. Digestible, he said, gesturing at a slide that literally said, revenue goes up, with an arrow pointing to a rainbow. I watched the board members nod along. Their eyes glazed over like they were hypnotized. Not one of them asked where the stress curves were. Nobody noticed he'd removed the legal disclaimers from the net revenue projections. Those disclaimers weren't decorative. They were baked into our original term sheet, required by law for investor sign-off. I looked at Victoria, our general counsel, hoping for backup. Her face was stone. She sat with her arms crossed, watching this train wreck like she couldn't decide whether to intervene or let it burn. No help there. I turned back to my binder, sitting abandoned on the table like evidence nobody wanted to acknowledge. For 12 years, I'd been the numbers guy. Never flashy, never political, just accurate, just reliable. And for 12 years, that had been enough. But now they wanted flash over substance, vibes over safeguards. Joe was the living embodiment of that shift. I could already hear the future conversations when this deal imploded. Wait, where were the compliance checks? Someone would ask. Didn't Clinton used to handle that? They'd mumble. Except by then, I'd be gone. Because I saw it crystal clear at that moment. My job wasn't just in danger. It was already dead. They just hadn't printed the death certificate yet. I said nothing for the rest of that meeting. Just closed my laptop slowly, like it physically hurt. As Joe sailed into his next slide about synergistic growth vectors, I memorized every face in that room. Every executive who looked away. Every coward who smirked. Every person who chose flash over facts. Let them have their vibes, I thought. I still had the receipts. The next morning, my coffee hadn't even finished brewing when Joe summoned me to his corner office like he was the emperor of finance. I walked in with my spine straight and my voice calm, carrying a printed copy of our investor agreement with 2 sections highlighted in red ink. Section 4.2 and 4.7, I said, placing the document on his glass desk. Those compliance disclaimers in my original model weren't suggestions. They're legal requirements. If we present financials without them to investors, we're violating federal securities regulations. Joe didn't even glance up from his phone. Just gave me that lazy smirk he probably practiced in the mirror. Clinton, this is why nobody likes working with finance people. You obsess over hypotheticals. Investors want momentum, not a legal textbook. They want legal compliance, I replied evenly. He finally looked up, blue eyes full of the kind of condescension that rich kids learn in boarding school. You're not a deal maker, Clinton. You're a spreadsheet robot. I flinched, just slightly, and that tiny reaction was all he needed. I'll handle the investor relations from here, he added, waving me off like I was a waiter at a restaurant he couldn't afford. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't slam the door. I gathered my papers, nodded once, and walked out of his office with the eerie calm of someone who'd already planned their escape route from a building that was definitely going to catch fire. The next morning, I showed up to work like normal. Checked emails, answered 3 calls, finished my oatmeal at my desk. Then the HR notification popped up on my screen. Can you stop by when you have a moment? It felt like walking into a funeral home. The HR manager, a woman named Candace whose job was pressing the eject button while offering branded merchandise as consolation prizes, delivered the news with fake sympathy dripping from every word. Due to organizational restructuring, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. Eliminated. Like I was a bug that needed squashing. I looked at Candace, then at the operations director sitting in the corner, avoiding eye contact like I had something contagious. There was no farewell speech. No thank you for helping build a $400 million valuation. Just an NDA packet, a severance check, and the kind of silence that smells like printer toner and cowardice. Security arrived 5 minutes later. Of course they did. Can't have the dangerous spreadsheet robot wandering the halls unsupervised. I was allowed to pack 1 cardboard box. 1. My coffee mug. A paperweight. A half-dead plant I'd forgotten to water. They watched me like I might suddenly hack into the mainframe and delete QuickBooks. But what they didn't know, what Joe never bothered to check, was that I'd never saved my real models on the company's servers. The models with the legal scaffolding and risk simulations and compliance flags, they lived elsewhere. Timestamped, encrypted mine. I'd learned that lesson years ago watching other companies screw over their best people right before going public. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't throw my coffee at anyone's face like some Hollywood revenge fantasy. I just walked out, my footsteps echoing in that sterile hallway, the cardboard box feeling surprisingly light in my arms. Sitting in my car in the parking garage, surrounded by exhaust fumes and the echo of my own heartbeat, I did exactly one thing. I called my lawyer. Hey, Benjamin, I said, steady as a surgeon with a scalpel. Remember that clause we negotiated back in 2018? I think it's time we used it. Benjamin, who had been my lawyer since college. We'd shared ramen noodles and law school nightmares together. Now he was a legal predator in expensive suits, the kind of attorney who once made a hedge fund CEO cry during a deposition, then sent him a fruit basket the next day. God bless your paranoid heart, Benjamin muttered over the phone, already pulling up my employment contract. I could hear papers rustling on his end. Meet me at Grotto's in an hour. Same booth we used for finals cramming. Bring everything. An hour later, we sat in the back corner of that little cafe that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. The same place where we'd studied for our final exams a lifetime ago. Different stakes now. Benjamin spread the contract pages across the sticky table like he was reading ancient prophecy. Page 23, section 8.4, he said, tapping a paragraph with his pen. Upon termination without cause, all original financial models, analytical frameworks, and derivative logic created by employees revert to employee ownership. I leaned back, letting those words sink into my bloodstream like good whiskey. The language wasn't vague. It was bulletproof. We'd crafted this clause a decade ago, back when the company still operated out of a co-working space and the founders actually read every contract themselves. I remembered the argument. I'd insisted on this protection after watching another startup steal their analyst's algorithms, then fire him right before the IPO. The founders laughed then. You really think we'd screw you over? They'd asked. I hadn't answered. Just made sure the clause stayed in the contract. And now here we are. What exactly reverts to you? Benjamin asked, leaning forward like a shark smelling blood. I slid a flash drive across the table. It looked innocent enough, small, silver, unremarkable. But it contained the holy grail of investor due diligence. A complete analytical framework for financial projections, including regulatory compliance mapping, scenario stress paths, and a cascading logic system I'd spent 4 years perfecting. Everything they need to close that deal, I said quietly. Everything they don't have anymore. Benjamin plugged the drive into his laptop and scanned the file directory. His eyebrows went up. Please tell me you have timestamps proving independent creation. For versions, I replied. All registered with the Copyright Office. All developed on my personal equipment. None of them ever touched their company's servers. I'd been careful from day one, keeping my best work off their network. I'd seen Joe coming long before he had a name or a corner office. I'd seen too many golden boys with MBA credentials and PowerPoint charm rise fast and crash harder, taking better people's work down with them. I wasn't going to be roadkill on someone else's career path. So while they played around with dashboards and presentation templates, I'd built the foundation beneath their entire financial strategy. Alone, after hours, backed up on multiple drives, encrypted, copyrighted, trademarked under my own LLC that I'd quietly formed the year Joe graduated business school. They don't just need the files, I continued, sipping my coffee with steady hands. They need legal rights to use analytical logic. And I never signed those away. Benjamin looked like he wanted to high-five me. You beautiful, paranoid genius. But I wasn't celebrating. Not really. This wasn't about revenge. It was about corrections. 12 years of building something solid, something that actually protected investors' money, and watching it get bulldozed by a man with a Pinterest-perfect resume and a 3-slide deck. This wasn't vindication I was chasing. It was gravity. Natural consequences for people who confuse style with substance. I stared out the cafe window, watching a bus rumble past filled with tired people heading home from jobs that didn't appreciate them. Somewhere across town, Joe was probably celebrating with champagne, thinking he'd eliminated the boring old spreadsheet guy who asked too many questions. Let him toast. The models weren't his. They never had been. And tomorrow, he was going to find out exactly what that meant. It started with a text from my old teammate Biden. 2 words, all caps, holy shit. I was standing in line at the grocery store, third person back, behind someone arguing about coupon expiration dates, when my phone buzzed with a second message. Then a third. The group chat with my former finance team. We'd called ourselves the error checkers, lit up like a Christmas tree in July. Biden. The investor call this morning was a nuclear disaster. Joe couldn't answer a single technical question. I didn't smile exactly, but something loosened in my chest, like a knot I'd been carrying for weeks finally coming undone. The grocery line suddenly didn't seem so annoying. I stepped outside into the afternoon heat and called Biden before his phone even finished ringing. Dude, you should have seen it, Biden whispered, like he was hiding in a bathroom stall. Joe started with those rainbow pie charts of his. The investors looked confused from the first slide. I leaned against a sun-bleached wall, letting the warmth settle over me like armor. And then they asked for the stress testing scenarios. You know, the ones you'd built for the last 3 funding rounds. Biden's voice was tight with secondhand embarrassment. You could literally watch Joe realize they weren't in his presentation. He started flipping through slides like a magician who forgot to bring the rabbit. I closed my eyes, picturing Joe sweating through his tailored shirt. The kind of man who thought his jawline could substitute for actual financial analysis. The lead investor, that silver-haired guy from Dominion Capital, asked if the revenue projections had been adjusted for the new FTC regulations on B2B data services. Joe had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, Biden continued. Just stood there like a deer in headlights. And then, get this, he actually said the compliance requirements felt too granular for the narrative flow. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered his smirk when he called me a spreadsheet robot. That's when Victoria jumped in, Biden said. Started asking why the regulatory disclaimers had been removed from the financial projections. Joe's answer. Biden paused for dramatic effect. He said they cluttered the visual aesthetic. The emergency board meeting was called immediately after the investor call ended. Biden wasn't in the room, but rumors spread through the office like wildfire. Voices raised. Someone definitely slammed a door. The legal team demanded to know who had authorized the modified projections. One of the VCs apparently muttered, "This is exactly how Theranos started." Dominion Capital is freezing the funding round, Biden whispered. The deal's not dead officially, but it's definitely on life support. I thanked Biden and ended the call, then walked 2 blocks in total silence. I found myself sitting on a bench in the park across from the office building where I used to work. From there, I could see the 14th floor windows. Somewhere behind that glass, Joe was probably pacing, calling this a minor setback, maybe blaming Victoria for being too cautious. But I knew the truth. It was never about caution or narrative flow. It was about having guardrails when you're driving 90 miles per hour toward a cliff. The formal cease and desist letter went out at 9:15 a.m. on a Wednesday. Benjamin kept it surgical, 3 pages, polite, professional, and loaded like a weapon. The subject line alone made my morning coffee taste better. Intellectual property ownership and unauthorized use of proprietary financial models. Section 8.4.2. I'd watched Benjamin draft the final version the night before, both of us sitting in the back corner of a wine bar, laptop screens glowing against half-empty glasses. He'd clicked send with a grin and said, "That should ruin a few breakfasts." The letter stated, without drama or emotion, that my termination had triggered the reversion clause in my employment contract. All original financial models, analytical frameworks, scenario projections, and derivative logic, including the legal scaffolding required for investor presentations, now belong to me. The attachments were devastating in their simplicity. File timestamps proving independent creation, copyright registration certificates, trademark filings for 2 of the analytical engines I'd built, notarized documentation that the models had never been hosted on company infrastructure. The final paragraph was written like a scalpel pressed just hard enough to break skin. Please be advised that continued use, reproduction, or reference to the aforementioned intellectual property may constitute federal copyright infringement. We recommend immediate cessation of all usage until a formal licensing agreement can be negotiated. I read it once, then deleted it from my inbox. I didn't need to memorize it. The message had been delivered. That afternoon, the first leaked screenshot appeared. Someone had forwarded it to Biden, who forwarded it to me with a popcorn emoji. The company's Slack was apparently melting down. The screenshots kept coming throughout the day, each one more beautiful than the last. Operations Director. Wait, did we really terminate the only person who understood our financial models? Legal Counsel. Someone please confirm we obtained usage rights in the separation agreement. Reply. We didn't. Board Member. Joe assured us Clinton was easily replaceable and overly technical. 6 thumbs down reactions. I didn't respond to any of it. Didn't call anyone. Didn't post cryptic messages on LinkedIn. I just watched the dominoes fall from my kitchen table, scrolling through real estate listings to see how far my severance money might stretch if I decided to disappear into the mountains for a year. The power was shifting, not because I grabbed it, but because they dropped it, fumbled it in their rush to replace substance with style, expertise with charisma. The company had been my quiet cathedral of logic for over a decade. Now it was a circus, and the clowns had accidentally set the tent on fire. I stood at the edge of the chaos with zero intention of running back in to help put out the flames. Not yet, anyway. 2 days after the letter landed, the money stopped flowing. Not theoretically, not in whispers or rumors. Frozen. Official. Panic-inducing. Dominion Capital sent formal notice halting disbursement of the $180 million Series C funding, citing material deficiencies in risk assessment protocols and regulatory compliance documentation. Translation: where the hell are the actual numbers? Joe spun like a tornado made of desperation and expensive cologne. Every Slack channel turned into a blame spiral. The investor presentation got revised 14 times in 48 hours. Legal was copied on everything. Someone from PR actually Googled crisis management for startups. And I sat in a beachside coffee shop 2 towns over, laptop glowing with alerts from a monitoring system I'd quietly set up years earlier. I could watch their internal metrics in real time. Investor portal access, locked. Internal audit status, under full review. Cash burn rate analysis, payroll pressure within 6 weeks. They'd made promises based on projections they could no longer legally use. The cracks weren't just forming, they were becoming canyons. On day 4 of the funding freeze, Benjamin's phone rang. He didn't even need to check the caller ID. "Let me guess," he said, answering the speaker. "Joe wants to talk." He did. Through a mutual contact, Joe had reached out with a proposition so desperate it should have come with a warning label. Bring me back quietly. No public acknowledgement, no apology, just a brief consulting engagement to clarify some legacy analytical frameworks so the deal could move forward. I didn't laugh when Benjamin told me. I just looked at him across his mahogany desk and said, "Tell him my consulting rate is no longer calculated hourly." The response was drafted with surgical precision. Mr. Cole is currently evaluating multiple strategic opportunities and cannot commit to any engagement that does not fully recognize the value of his intellectual contributions. Any potential consultation would require a premium contract structure with retroactive licensing terms. Rate and terms are non-negotiable. Joe's silence was deafening. But the next day, the board scheduled another emergency session. The internal leaks resumed almost immediately. This time, the tone was different. Panic had replaced arrogance. Legal counsel, we need a path to recover those models without admitting IP infringement. Operations director, there isn't one. He owns them outright. Joe finally responded. This is getting ridiculous. Let's offer him a 3-month consulting contract and move on. 12 thumbs down reactions. I refreshed the company's Glassdoor page for entertainment. 4 new anonymous reviews had appeared since the funding freeze. All mentioned leadership instability and strategic incompetence. I closed the browser tab. This wasn't about vindication anymore. This was about leverage. The kind you don't gloat about. The kind you wield with patience and precision. I pulled up the company's quarterly financial reports. All public data, if you knew where to look. Ran my own cash flow projections based on their current burn rate. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Less if 2 of their major vendors demanded upfront payments. I could have helped them. Could have wrapped the deal in a neat bow and walked back in like a hero. But that would have required pretending Joe was still in control, and I was done with that fiction. I didn't want my old job back. I wanted them to feel the shape of my absence. And based on the increasingly frantic Slack screenshots, they definitely were. The encrypted email arrived at 7:23 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Subject line, confidential introduction, Dominion Capital Partners. I blinked the sleep from my eyes, read it twice, and set my coffee down with a soft clink. It wasn't from Dominion directly. It came through a boutique advisory firm that specialized in sensitive transitions for high-stakes transactions. The kind of intermediary that gets called when venture capital firms need to change course without spooking markets or damaging reputations. Translation: Dominion doesn't trust the current management anymore, and they don't want their fingerprints on this conversation until they know you'll take the meeting. I waited exactly 90 minutes before replying, long enough to let the message marinate, not so long as to seem uninterested. When I finally responded, it was brief, available for confidential discussion under mutual NDA at the location of my choosing. They agreed within 2 hours. By Monday afternoon, I was seated in a minimalist conference room inside a co-working space downtown. All frosted glass and exposed brick, the kind of place where startups go to die quietly. Across from me sat a man named Tyson Webb, late 40s, understated suit, expensive watch, the kind of face that had negotiated hostile takeovers before breakfast. Off the record, Mr. Cole, he said without preamble, we believe your departure was premature. The current funding round is essentially dead. The financial models we reviewed last week don't meet basic institutional due diligence standards. I said nothing, just nodded once. Webb continued, folding his hands. We'd like you to walk us through the original analytical framework. Privately. No company involvement whatsoever. And if I decline? I asked. He didn't blink. Then $180 million in funding disappears, and everyone goes home. I didn't smile, but I didn't say no either. The NDA was airtight. Benjamin made sure of that. My terms were crystal clear: no licensing transfers, no usage assumptions, no promises of future access. This was a one-time analytical consultation at 5 times my previous salary, paid in advance. They agreed without negotiation. I arrived the next morning carrying my laptop, 2 encrypted drives, and the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. For 4 hours, I walked them through the numbers. The real projections, the scenario analyses, the regulatory requirements Joe had dismissed as narrative clutter. I didn't editorialize, didn't criticize, just presented the mathematics like gospel and let the silence afterward carry its own judgment. When it ended, Webb stood and extended his hand. You built all of this yourself? He asked. The entire framework. Every line of code, I replied. Every analytical pathway. Another pause. Then, there's something else we need to discuss. Off the record. I raised an eyebrow. We're not just considering withdrawing our current investment, he said carefully. We're considering reallocating it entirely. New structure, smaller scale, better management. A fund that needs someone with deep technical expertise and proven institutional knowledge. I let that settle. You're offering me Joe's job? Webb shook his head. No, we're offering you something he was never qualified to apply for. I said nothing for a long time. I just packed my drives, zipped my laptop bag, and walked to the window. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of people building things, breaking things, starting over. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. All those years of being the safety net, the person with contingency plans nobody read until everything was falling apart. Now they were the ones in free fall, and I was standing on solid ground. The final cease and desist letter went out at 8 a.m. sharp the following Monday. Benjamin didn't sugarcoat this one. No polite pleasantries or corporate courtesy language. Just the full weight of legal precision aimed directly at the throat. Your organization is hereby formally instructed to cease all use, derivative reference, or continued representation of Mr. Cole's proprietary financial modeling frameworks. Further attempts to modify or present this intellectual property without explicit licensing agreements will constitute actionable federal copyright infringement. Consider this your final notice. The subject line was 5 words: cease, desist, retract. Immediately, it hit inboxes like a small bomb. By noon, the board had convened another emergency session in the conference room on the 19th floor. I wasn't there, obviously, but I didn't need to be. My name was printed across every item on their agenda. Joe walked into that meeting like a man still pretending the building wasn't on fire. Confident jaw, tight smile, the kind of aggressive optimism that works great until it doesn't. I believe Mr. Cole is bluffing, he announced to the room. This is just legal posturing. Standard negotiation tactics. Victoria, the general counsel, didn't even look up from her folder. He's not bluffing. Joe paused, then forced a laugh. Come on. It's just contract language. Boilerplate intimidation. Victoria looked up now, her expression flat as concrete. No, Joe. It's copyright filings, trademark registrations, and timestamp development logs filed through his personal LLC before he was ever terminated. Someone in the room exhaled hard. Someone else whispered, "Oh God." Clinton Webb, one of the original board members, slammed his laptop shut. This is corporate malpractice, he said. We built the entire investor presentation on intellectual property we never owned. They already know. Victoria cut in, her voice calm but deadly. Dominion's risk team spent yesterday morning reviewing the original models under NDA. Joe went pale. 2 time zones away, I sat on my back porch with my feet up, eating grapes and watching storm clouds roll across the hills. I didn't need live updates. The shockwaves would travel fast enough. Back in the boardroom, the newer board members were starting to panic. We were told Clinton was overly technical, one of them said, voice tight with barely controlled anger. Replaceable, remember? Is this what replaceable looks like? Nobody answered. Someone from strategy mumbled something about salvaging the investor relationship. Another asked if Joe had documentation proving they owned rights to the analytical models. He didn't. He couldn't. Because I'd never signed those rights away. That's when half the board stood up. Not in protest or solidarity, in resignation. They walked out without a word, briefcases in hand. Expressions blank with the kind of corporate dread that only comes when you realize the entire empire was built on quicksand. Joe stood alone in the middle of that glass-walled room, hands hanging at his sides like broken tools. Across town, I bit into another grape and watched the juice stain my fingers purple. My phone rang at 4:47 p.m. No caller ID, just a quiet buzz on the table next to my half-finished notebook and a cooling mug of tea. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Clinton Cole. Tyson Webb, came the reply. No pleasantries, just his voice, focused and direct. Do you have a few minutes? Depends, I said. Are you calling on behalf of Dominion? A pause. No, I'm calling about something entirely new. He didn't waste time with sales pitches or corporate diplomacy. Just cut straight to the center. We're launching a new investment vehicle. Smaller scale, higher standards. Built around actual due diligence instead of PowerPoint presentations and networking lunches. I said nothing, just listened. We're assembling a founding team, Webb continued. People who understand that substance beats style every time. You're the first person on our list. I stared out my kitchen window. Sunset was painting the sky orange and gold. My laptop sat open on the counter, still displaying the company's stock price. It had dropped 18% since morning. What's the position? I asked. Chief Risk Officer and founding partner, Webb said. Equity package, performance bonuses, complete autonomy over analytical frameworks. We build it around your expertise. I didn't smile, but something settled in my chest. Not victory, clarity. Send me the term sheet, I said. Let's talk specifics. He laughed, low and relieved. I'll have something for you by the end of business today. I ended the call and walked back to the porch. I opened my laptop to a fresh browser tab, a blank page, and a clean beginning. The old company's logo flickered in my peripheral vision like a dying light bulb. I closed that tab and opened a new document. Started typing the framework for my new consulting firm. Bold headers, clean formatting, substance over flash. 2 days later, the funding officially died. Dominion Capital sent formal withdrawal of their $180 million commitment, citing fundamental deficiencies in risk management protocols and regulatory compliance infrastructure. Joe tried to spin it as a temporary setback. Market conditions, investor caution, nothing they couldn't overcome with a few strategic adjustments. But the damage was already spreading. Other potential investors started asking harder questions. Due diligence requirements got stricter. Word traveled fast in venture capital circles. Within a week, 3 key employees had submitted resignations. Within 2 weeks, 2 major clients had initiated contract reviews. The company's valuation, once hovering near $500 million, began its slow spiral toward Earth. Joe lasted 6 more weeks. The board finally voted him out on a Thursday afternoon, citing strategic misalignment and operational deficiencies. No severance package. No glowing recommendations. Just a brief press release about leadership transition and refocusing on core competencies. By then, I was already 3 months into building something new. Webb's fund launched with $75 million in initial commitments, all from investors who'd grown tired of flash and started demanding actual substance again. My name was on the letterhead. My frameworks powered every investment decision. My analytical models, the real ones, not Joe's cartoon versions, became the gold standard for technical due diligence in our sector. The old company limped along for another year before finally folding. Joe tried launching a consulting practice, but his reputation had been thoroughly scorched. Last I heard, he was pitching social media marketing services to local restaurants. I didn't attend any industry conferences where I might run into former colleagues. Didn't post about the new role on LinkedIn. Didn't send any, just wanted to update you emails. I just worked. Built something real this time. Something that couldn't be bulldozed by the next golden boy with an MBA and a 3-slide deck. Something with my name carved into every contract clause and my logic woven into every analytical thread. 6 months after Webb's fund officially launched, we closed our first major deal, a $50 million investment in a biotech startup with actual revenue and actual products. The due diligence took 3 months. Every number was verified. Every risk was mapped. Every compliance requirement was documented and cross-referenced. The startup CEO sent a handwritten thank you note afterward. Said it was the most thorough and professional investment process she'd ever experienced. Said it felt like working with people who actually understood what they were doing. I framed that note and hung it in my new office. Not because I needed validation, but because it represented something Joe would never understand. The difference between building something that lasts and building something that looks good in a PowerPoint presentation. A year later, Webb offered me a full partnership. Equal equity, shared decision-making authority, my name on the fund documents. I didn't say yes immediately. Took a weekend to think about it, to make sure I wasn't making emotional decisions based on past frustrations. But when I signed those partnership papers, sitting in that same conference room where I'd first walked them through my models, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not revenge, not vindication, just the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged. That evening, I drove past the old office building. The 14th floor was dark except for a few security lights. New company had moved in, something about artificial intelligence and customer engagement platforms. The old logo was gone from the lobby directory. I didn't slow down or stop to reminisce. Just noted it in passing, like checking off an item on a very long list. That chapter was closed. The book had moved on to better pages. At home, I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. sat on my back porch, and watched the stars emerge over the hills. My phone buzzed with a text from Benjamin. Saw the partnership announcement in the journal. Drink tomorrow. I typed back, absolutely. But you're buying. He sent back a laughing emoji and, worth every penny. You paranoid genius. I raised my glass to the night sky. Not in celebration, exactly. More like acknowledgement. Of lessons learned, bridges burned, and foundations built to last. Of the difference between being right and being respected. Of the long, patient work of building something that couldn't be dismissed with a smirk and a wave of the hand. Here's to footnotes, I said quietly, and took a slow sip. The bourbon tasted like victory, but better. It tasted like coming home to a place you'd built yourself, with materials nobody else could take away. It tasted like the future, and for the first time in years, that future looked exactly like what I'd always imagined it could be. Tomorrow, there will be new models to build, new risks to analyze, new investments to evaluate. But tonight, there was just the porch, the bourbon, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Not just the job they'd fired me for doing too well, but the job I'd given myself, proving that substance always wins in the end. Number 22. 6 months passed. The fund grew to $200 million under management. 3 successful exits, 2 pending IPOs, and a reputation for being the most thorough due diligence operation in the region. We turned down more deals than we accepted, which only made entrepreneurs want to work with us more. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those years of being called too technical and overly cautious, and now investors were paying premium fees specifically for that approach. What Joe had seen as weakness, the market recognized as strength. I was reviewing term sheets in my office when Biden called. My former teammate had landed at a smaller firm after the old company folded, and we'd stayed in loose contact. You're not going to believe this, he said, barely containing his laughter. Joe's been trying to get meetings with venture firms for 8 months. Nobody will take his calls. I set down my pen. Really, word got around fast after Dominion pulled their funding. Other VCs started asking questions about what really happened. Turns out, when you torpedo a $180 million deal because you replaced actual analysis with rainbow pie charts, people remember. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline. What's he doing now? Last I heard, he was working for his father-in-law's real estate company. Residential sales. Biden paused. Clinton, the man who thought he could replace you, is now showing 3-bedroom colonials to suburban families. I didn't laugh, but something warm settled in my chest. Not schadenfreude, exactly. More like the universe finding its natural balance again. There's something else, Biden continued. Tyson Webb gave a presentation at the Venture Capital Summit last week. Spent 20 minutes talking about the importance of technical depth and due diligence. Never mentioned you by name, but everyone in the room knew exactly what he was talking about. The call ended, and I sat quietly for a moment. Outside my window, the city hummed with ambition and possibility. Somewhere out there, other people were building things, taking risks, betting their careers on ideas that might change everything or might crash spectacularly. The difference was, now I was the one helping them figure out which was which. Not with buzzwords or gut feelings, but with mathematics. With models that accounted for failure as carefully as they projected success. With the kind of analysis that Joe had dismissed as robot work. My assistant knocked and entered with a stack of documents. The Meridian Industries term sheet is ready for your review, she said. Their management team wants to schedule a follow-up call. I glanced at the company name, remembering the initial pitch meeting. Solid fundamentals, experienced leadership, realistic projections. The kind of deal that would never make headlines, but would quietly generate returns for years. Schedule it for Thursday morning, I said, and asked them to have their chief technology officer on the call. I want to walk through their development roadmap section by section. She nodded and left. I opened the term sheet and began reading, my pen moving steadily across the margins as I noted questions, potential risks, areas that needed deeper analysis. The same meticulous approach that had once made me a target now made me indispensable. An hour later, Benjamin texted, "Drinks tonight? I have news." We met at the same wine bar where he drafted that first cease and desist letter 2 years earlier. He was already seated in our usual corner booth, 2 glasses of red wine waiting. "What's the news?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He grinned and pulled out his phone, showing me a LinkedIn notification. Joe just sent me a connection request. I stared at the screen, reading Joe's current job title, Senior Sales Associate, Bennett Family Properties. Below that, a message. Hi Benjamin, hope you're doing well. I'm exploring opportunities in legal consulting and would love to catch up sometime. He's looking for work, I said. Looks like it. Probably figured I might know someone who needs help with contract reviews or basic corporate law. Benjamin took a sip of wine. I'm not responding. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other people at other tables having conversations about their own ambitions and setbacks. 2 years ago, I'd been the one looking for work, the one whose career had been derailed by someone else's arrogance. You know what's funny? I said finally. I don't feel satisfied about any of this. Joe crashing, the old company folding, any of it. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. Really? It's just. I paused, searching for the right words. It all feels inevitable now, like it was always going to happen this way, once he decided that style mattered more than substance. You're not even a little bit vindicated? I shook my head. Vindication would mean I'd been trying to prove something to them. But I wasn't. I was just trying to do the work correctly. I took a sip of wine. When they fired me for being too technical, they weren't wrong about what I was. They were wrong about what they needed. Benjamin smiled. And now I work with people who know the difference. We finished our drinks and walked out into the cool evening air. The city lights stretched out before us, each window representing someone working late, building something, taking their own calculated risks. Tyson called me yesterday. I said as we reached the corner where we'd parted ways. The fund is expanding. He wants to bring in 2 more partners and launch a second vehicle focused on international markets. That's incredible, Clinton. You've built something real. We've built something real, I corrected. None of this would have happened without that contract clause you insisted on back in 2018. Benjamin laughed. Your paranoid heart insisted on it. I just wrote it down. We shook hands and went our separate ways. I walked the 8 blocks to my apartment, taking the long route past the park where I'd once sat watching the office building where I used to work. That building looked different now, smaller somehow. Just another glass tower in a city full of them. At home, I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, opened a new document, and started outlining the framework for the international fund. Technical requirements, regulatory considerations, risk assessment protocols. The same meticulous approach I'd always used, but now with the freedom to do it right from the beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyson. Board approved the expansion. Let's discuss your equity percentage tomorrow. This is going to be bigger than we imagined. I typed back, looking forward to it. I'll have some preliminary models ready by morning. Set the phone aside and kept working. Outside, the city settled into its nighttime rhythm. Somewhere out there, other people were building things, making mistakes, learning lessons the hard way. Other Joes were probably dismissing other experts, choosing flash over substance, setting themselves up for falls they couldn't see coming. But that wasn't my concern anymore. My job now was to help the smart ones, the careful ones, the people who understood that true success comes from building things that last. To be the technical expert they needed instead of the problem they thought they had to solve. I raised my glass one more time, not to victory or revenge, but to the simple satisfaction of work done well. To footnotes and spreadsheets and all the unglamorous details that actually make the difference between success and failure. Here's to being too technical, I said quietly, and got back to war.